The golden light of Asvan Prime's twin suns refracted across the crystalline towers of the capital city, casting rainbows that danced over the polished streets. Ilara strode through the bustling plaza, her gleaming, diamond-like skin shimmering in the sun. The Iovari capital pulsed with life. Merchants hawked gleaming wares, children in exoskeletal play armor dashed through the crowds, and overhead, sleek airships hummed through the ion-charged sky. For Ilara, the commotion was as familiar as the rhythm of her twin hearts. She was the youngest recruit of the Praetorian Vanguard, an elite faction of warriors whose deeds were sung in solemn chants across the galaxy. She wore her title like a badge of honor, and, when it suited her, a casual excuse to skip boring diplomatic lessons. The plaza's holographic broadcast screens flickered to life as she passed, displaying images of her mentor, Kral. He stood stoic in full battle armor, his 6-foot-wide shoulders filling the frame. His voice, a deep rumble that could make thunder seem polite, echoed through the city. "The Vanguard stands eternal," he declared, "guardians of strength, protectors of honor. Today our cadets embark on missions to uphold the legacy of the Iovari people." Ilara smirked as she adjusted the strap of her plasma blade. "Guardians of strength," she muttered, "and the occasional hollow speech. Talking to yourself again, cadet?" The voice belonged to Arun, a fellow Vanguard recruit and Ilara's long-suffering training partner. His crystalline skin glowed faintly blue, a sign of his recent victory in a sparring match. Ilara had bruises to match. "Just marveling at the poetry of it all," she said with mock sincerity. "I mean, really, Guardians of Strength? Sounds like a bad title for a hollow novel." Arun chuckled. "Careful, or Kral will have you writing the next one. Anyway, rumor has it your first mission's a diplomatic gig. Humans, no less." Ilara stopped mid-stride, raising a skeptical brow ridge. "Humans? You mean those tiny, squishy things from the fringe systems? The ones who need machines to do everything?" "Tiny, squishy, and apparently very territorial," Arun replied. "Their colony on Aurelis 9 has been in a standoff with the rogue Iovari for months. The Council thinks sending you might diffuse things." Ilara laughed, the sound bright and ringing. "Diffuse? I'm a warrior, not a peacekeeper. Besides, humans are practically a fairy tale. I heard one got scared of its own shadow and invented a laser cannon to fight it." "Then you'll fit right in," Arun quipped. As they reached the Vanguard training hall, Ilara found Kral waiting for her, arms crossed. His crystalline form glinted with the wear of countless battles, each scar a story etched into his body. "Cadet Ilara," he began, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "You are to depart for Aurelis 9 immediately. The humans require reassurance of our peaceful intentions." Ilara straightened, adopting the air of a dutiful soldier. "Peaceful intentions, sir. Should I leave my plasma blade behind?" Kral's stern expression softened, just slightly. "You'll take it. But remember, this mission is about more than strength. You are to observe, learn, and represent the best of the Iovari." Ilara bit back a sarcastic remark, instead offering a crisp salute. "Understood, sir. I'll make sure the humans know we're here to teach them how to handle their shadows." Kral's deep chuckle followed her as she boarded the sleek diplomatic vessel. The journey to Aurelis 9 was uneventful, if you didn't count Ilara's growing boredom. The ship's automated systems handled everything, leaving her with little to do but stare out at the swirling nebulae beyond the viewport. She practiced her sword techniques in the narrow quarters, imagining herself slicing through rogue Iovari, or perhaps an overly confident human with a penchant for storytelling. When the ship finally entered Aurelis 9's orbit, Ilara's first impression was underwhelming. The colony was small, its structures utilitarian and coated in the dust of the planet's red soil. There was none of the grandeur of Asvan Prime. Even the landing pad was little more than a flat stretch of reinforced metal surrounded by automated turrets. As she descended the ramp, she was greeted by a human delegate. He was a wiry man with a graying beard, wearing a uniform that looked like it had seen one too many sandstorms. "Welcome to Aurelis 9, he said, extending a hand. I'm Commander Abrams." Ilara stared at the gesture, then at Abrams. "Is this some sort of greeting ritual?" Abrams blinked, then laughed. "Ah, right. Cultural differences. It's a handshake, our way of saying hello." Ilara cautiously extended her hand, her grip accidentally crushing Abrams's fingers. He winced, but recovered quickly. "Strong grip. Good. You'll need it." "For what?" Abrams' response was interrupted by the wail of an alarm. The rogue Iovari were attacking. Ilara's instincts kicked in, her plasma blade humming to life as she scanned the horizon. But before she could act, a human soldier burst onto the scene. He was smaller than Abrams, with a battered helmet and a rifle slung over his shoulder. He moved with practiced ease, directing the colony's defenses with sharp, efficient commands. Ilara raised an eyebrow as she watched him. "That's a human soldier? He's barely taller than my plasma blade." Abrams grinned. "Don't let the size fool you. That's Lieutenant Sam Hayes. He's a legend around here." Ilara snorted. "A legend? He doesn't even have armor. What's he going to do, talk the rogues to death?" But as the first shots rang out, Ilara saw something she didn't expect. Hayes moved with an intensity that belied his stature, coordinating a defense that turned the tide of the battle. He wasn't strong, but he was smart, impossibly smart. And for the first time, Ilara wondered if the fairy tales might have a kernel of truth after all. The red haze of Aurelius IX's horizon blurred with smoke as the rogue Iovari launched their attack. Energy bolts sizzled past Ilara, forcing her to duck behind a sturdy metallic pillar. The colony's alarm blared a constant grating warning, a sound that to Ilara felt both unnecessarily loud and strangely theatrical. "So?" Ilara muttered to no one in particular, gripping her plasma blade tightly. "First impression of humans?" Loud, very loud. She peered around the pillar to assess the chaos. The rogue Iovari had landed several dropships, disgorging fighters armed with crystalline rifles that glowed ominously in the dim light. Ilara's crystalline skin shimmered in response, a natural reaction her kind had to the presence of others of their species. She tensed, ready to charge. Then she saw him again, Lieutenant Sam Hayes, barely 5'10", with a scuffed helmet that looked like it had been through a blender, darted between cover with the grace of a seasoned predator. His rifle spat precision fire, disabling a rogue Iovari's weapon with a shot that seemed almost lazy in its accuracy. "Stay low," he barked at a group of colonists scrambling for shelter. "And for the love of gravity, stop clumping together. You're not a herd of space llamas." Ilara blinked, taken aback. "What's a space llama?" she muttered. She filed the term away for later, deciding it was either an insult or some strange Earth-based creature. "Hey, Sparkles," Hayes called, snapping her attention back to him. He was crouched behind a stack of supply crates, waving her over. "You planning to help out or just admire the view?" Ilara bristled. "Sparkles?" "You're shiny. It's the first thing I noticed," Hayes shouted back, grinning. Annoyed, but intrigued, Ilara sprinted toward him. Her plasma blade cut through the air, deflecting a rogue's energy bolt. She skidded to a halt behind the crates, glaring at the human. "Listen here, Lieutenant Space Llama," she began. "I am not here to take orders from—" A rogue grenade clattered to the ground near them. Without hesitation, Hayes grabbed the device and lobbed it back toward the enemy with a nonchalant flick of his wrist. The explosion sent a shockwave through the battlefield, scattering the rogues like leaves. "Lieutenant Space Llama?" he said, raising an eyebrow. "Creative. I like it." Ilara huffed, unable to decide whether she was more irritated by his smugness or impressed by his reflexes. "What's the plan?" "The plan," Hayes said, ejecting a spent power cell from his rifle, "is to not die. Beyond that, I'm open to suggestions." Ilara rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress a smirk. "Fine. Let's not die. I'll cover the left flank. You focus on—" "Correction," Hayes interrupted, grinning. "You're the tank, Sparkles. I'm the brains. Stick with me and we'll get through this." Before Ilara could protest, he was already moving, darting from cover to cover with an ease that belied his fragile appearance. With a reluctant sigh, she followed, plasma blade at the ready. As the battle raged, Ilara found herself grudgingly impressed by Hayes. Despite his size and lack of natural armor, seriously, his skin looked like it could barely withstand a mild breeze. He fought with a combination of precision and ingenuity that she couldn't ignore. At one point, they were pinned down by a rogue sniper perched on a makeshift tower. Ilara prepared to charge, but Hayes held up a hand. "Hold on, Sparkles. Watch and learn." He rummaged through a pouch on his belt, pulling out a small spherical device that looked suspiciously like it had been assembled from spare parts. "What is that?" Ilara asked skeptically. "A little something I cooked up," Hayes replied. "I call it the boom ball. It's like a grenade, but with more personality." Before Ilara could respond, he tossed the device toward the sniper. It beeped cheerfully, as though it were delighted to be thrown, and then detonated in a burst of light and sound. The sniper toppled from the tower, stunned but unharmed. "Boom ball?" Ilara repeated, incredulous. "Patent pending," Hayes said with a wink. The humor was jarring but oddly effective. It lightened the oppressive tension of the battlefield, allowing Ilara to focus on her own strengths. She carved through the rogue ranks with precision, her plasma blade glowing like a comet as it cut through enemy weapons. Together, they began to turn the tide. As the last of the rogues retreated, Ilara and Hayes found themselves standing amidst the wreckage of the colony's outskirts. The silence was broken only by the occasional crackle of damaged equipment. "Well," Hayes said, slinging his rifle over his shoulder, "that was fun. Let's never do it again." Ilara gave him a sidelong glance. "You call that fun? Your species has a strange definition of the word." "Strange, but effective," Hayes countered. "Speaking of strange, you fight like a holographic action star. What's your secret? Do they make you eat asteroid dust or something?" "Training," Ilara said simply, though she couldn't help smirking. "And genetics. You humans wouldn't understand." "True," Hayes admitted, "but we make up for it with charm and duct tape." Ilara didn't know what duct tape was, but she decided she didn't need to ask. Instead, she studied Hayes more closely. For all his humor, there was a sharpness in his eyes, a tactical brilliance that she hadn't expected from someone who looked so soft. "You're not what I expected," she said finally. "Let me guess," Hayes replied. "You thought we'd all be screaming and running away." "Yes." He laughed, a sound so genuinely amused that Ilara found herself smiling despite herself. "Stick around, Sparkles," Hayes said, clapping her on the shoulder. "We might just surprise you." As night fell over Aurelis 9, Ilara sat on the colony's makeshift wall, gazing at the alien stars. Beside her, Hayes tinkered with another of his boom balls, muttering something about improving its personality. For the first time, Ilara felt a flicker of uncertainty. The humans, it seemed, were far more complex than the stories had led her to believe, and Hayes, this odd, resourceful soldier, was at the heart of it. "Maybe," she said softly, "the fairy tales got it wrong." Hayes glanced up, quirking an eyebrow. "What's that?" "Nothing," Ilara said quickly, standing and brushing off her armor. "Get some rest, Lieutenant Space Llama. Tomorrow we figure out what those rogues were really after." Hayes grinned. "You're starting to like me, aren't you?" Ilara rolled her eyes but didn't deny it. The morning on Aurelis 9 was as inhospitable as the rest of the planet. A dusty orange sunrise over jagged red cliffs, the air thick with fine particles that made breathing an exercise in perseverance. Ilara was already on her feet, meticulously sharpening the edge of her plasma blade. The weapon, a seamless extension of her arm in battle, hummed faintly with energy. Nearby, Lieutenant Sam Hayes emerged from the makeshift barracks, yawning and rubbing his eyes. He wore the same battered armor as the day before, though he had somehow managed to find a new scuff mark overnight. "Morning, Sparkles," he greeted, his voice groggy but cheerful. "You're up early. Do I detect a hint of warrior discipline?" Ilara didn't look up. "Unlike you, Lieutenant Space Llama, I don't sleep in until the third sun rises." Hayes grinned, stretching lazily. "Third sun? Pretty sure we've only got one here. Did someone slip something into your breakfast rations?" Ilara finally glanced at him, her expression dry. "It was a metaphor." "Ah," Hayes said, snapping his fingers. "Right. I keep forgetting you're fluent in warrior sarcasm. Comes with the sparkles, I assume." Ilara rolled her eyes, though she couldn't help a faint smirk. "Are you always this insufferable, or is it just a human survival tactic?" "Survival tactic," Hayes confirmed. "Humor keeps the panic away. That and coffee. Speaking of which..." He held up a dented mug, steam curling from its contents. "Liquid courage. Want some?" She wrinkled her nose. "I've seen what humans call coffee. It looks like engine lubricant." "Tastes like it too," Hayes admitted, taking a sip. "But it works. Now, what's the plan for today, oh fearless warrior?" Ilara stood, sliding her plasma blade into its sheath. "We're going to figure out why the rogues attacked this colony. Their actions don't make sense. Random skirmishes, no strategic objective. Something doesn't add up." Hayes nodded, his expression turning serious. "I've got some theories, but first we'll need to take a little field trip." "Field trip?" Ilara arched an eyebrow. "That's what we humans call recon," Hayes explained. "But don't worry, I'll bring snacks." The field trip began with a trek across Aurelius 9's unforgiving terrain. Ilara led the way, her crystalline skin reflecting the harsh sunlight, while Hayes followed with a handheld scanner that beeped intermittently. "Are you sure that thing is working?" Ilara asked after the fifth beep. "It sounds like it's dying." Hayes tapped the scanner, which emitted a disgruntled whine. "It's fine, just temperamental, kind of like you." "Careful, Lieutenant," Ilara said, her tone sharp but not entirely serious. "I could accidentally drop you in a ravine." Hayes laughed. "Noted. But seriously, this thing's picking up residual energy signatures from the rogue tech. If we're lucky, it'll lead us to their base, or at least a stash of weapons. And if we're unlucky, then we find out the hard way why the scanner was beeping." Ilara sighed, muttering something in her native tongue. Hayes couldn't understand the words, but he recognized the universal tone of exasperation. The scanner's beeping grew more insistent as they reached the edge of a wide canyon. Below, nestled among the rocky outcroppings, was a rogue Iovari outpost. The camp was heavily fortified, with energy shields crackling along its perimeter and patrols moving in precise formation. "Well," Hayes said, crouching behind a boulder to get a better view, "this looks cozy. Do you think they'd invite us in for tea if we asked nicely?" "Unlikely," Ilara replied, her eyes narrowing as she assessed the defenses. "This isn't just a rogue camp, it's a command center. They're planning something big." Hayes nodded, pulling a small device from his belt. It resembled a drone, though its cobbled-together appearance suggested it had been built in a hurry, or by someone with an affinity for improvisation. "What is that?" Ilara asked, eyeing the device skeptically. "Meet Sneaky Pete," Hayes said, holding it up. "Sneaky Pete?" "It's a recon drone. Quiet, inconspicuous, and surprisingly good at eavesdropping. Kind of like me." Ilara snorted. "More like irritating and likely to fall apart under pressure." "Hey, don't insult Pete," Hayes said, feigning offense. "He's sensitive." Ignoring him, Ilara watched as Hayes deployed the drone. Sneaky Pete buzzed softly as it flew toward the outpost, its small size allowing it to slip through gaps in the energy shields. The drone transmitted a live feed to Hayes' wrist display, showing a clearer view of the rogue camp. Inside, they saw Iovari soldiers unloading crates of advanced weaponry, as well as a massive crystalline device that pulsed with energy. "What is that?" Ilara asked, leaning closer to the display. "No idea," Hayes admitted, "but it looks expensive, and dangerous, two of my least favorite things. As they observed, Sneaky Pete picked up a conversation between two rogue leaders. The audio was patchy, but one phrase stood out. "The artifact will give us the edge we need." Ilara's expression hardened. "Artifact? They've stolen something." "Artifact, huh?" Hayes mused. "Sounds ominous. Also, very cliché. I mean, come on, call it a doodad or a gizmo or something. Spice it up a little." "This isn't a joke, Hayes," Ilara snapped. "Relax, Sparkles. I know it's serious. That's why I joke. Keeps my head clear." Ilara stared at him for a moment, then nodded grudgingly. "Fair enough. So what do we do now?" "We head back to the colony," Hayes said, retracting Sneaky Pete. "If that artifact's as powerful as it looks, we'll need backup and a plan." "And if they attack before we're ready?" Hayes flashed a grin. "Then we improvise. Don't worry, I've got more boom balls." Ilara sighed, already regretting her decision to trust him. But as they began the trek back to the colony, she couldn't deny a growing respect for the human soldier. Beneath his jokes and improvisation, there was a sharp mind and an indomitable spirit, qualities that, to her surprise, felt distinctly warrior-like. For the first time, she wondered if her people's obsession with physical strength had blinded them to other kinds of power. Perhaps, she thought, there was more to the fairy tales than she had ever imagined. The journey back to the colony wasn't quiet, nor was it uneventful. Sam Hayes, it turned out, had an uncanny knack for filling silences with an endless stream of chatter. "You know," he said, hopping over a jagged outcrop, "I read somewhere that your people can hear a molecule drop from a mile away. Is that true? Because if it is, I feel like you'd hate my playlist." Ilara shot him a sidelong glance. "If you mean the cacophony you call music, then yes, my auditory receptors are deeply offended." "Hey, it's called punk rock," Hayes defended. "Humans used it to protest oppressive systems and bad haircuts." "Your people are perplexing," Ilara said, her voice tinged with genuine curiosity. "You fight wars with sound?" "Sometimes, and when the mood strikes, we also make playlists for battles. Keeps morale up." Hayes grinned. "Tell me you don't have an epic combat anthem on your homeworld. Something like, I don't know, Clash of the Sparkly Titans?" Ilara snorted, an uncharacteristically amused sound. "We don't name our songs after ourselves. Our music is meditative, not warlike." "Missed opportunity," Hayes quipped. "I'd totally buy your album. Imagine it, Ilara's greatest hits, plasma blades and power ballads." She didn't dignify that with a response, though her faint smirk betrayed her amusement. When they finally reached the colony, the scene was both grim and bustling. The surviving colonists had gathered in the central square, their faces drawn but determined. Makeshift barricades had been erected, and several humans were hauling energy shields into position. "Back so soon?" a gruff voice called. Captain Lena Calder stepped into view, her armored frame towering over Hayes. She looked every inch the seasoned military officer, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Reporting for duty, Captain," Hayes said with a mock salute. "We found the rogue base. Turns out they've got something shiny and dangerous." "Shiny and dangerous?" Calder raised an eyebrow. "Care to elaborate?" Hayes gestured to Ilara. "I'll let our resident warrior princess explain. She's got a flair for the dramatic." Ilara crossed her arms. "The rogues have an artifact, a crystalline device of unknown origin. It emits high levels of energy, unlike anything I've seen before. They called it their edge. If they plan to use it, this colony is in danger." Calder frowned, her expression darkening. "Any idea what it does?" "Not yet," Hayes admitted. "But judging by the ominous glowing and the dramatic phrasing, it's probably not a toaster." Calder sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "All right, Lieutenant, enough jokes. What's our next move?" In a hastily assembled command room, a repurposed mess hall cluttered with maps and equipment, Hayes and Yalara presented their findings to the colony's defenders. The atmosphere was tense, but laced with an undercurrent of determination. "We've got two priorities," Calder said, her tone brisk. 1. Figure out what this artifact does and how to neutralize it. 2. Fortify the colony against another attack. "I can help with the first," Hayes offered. "Give me access to the tech lab and a pot of coffee, and I'll see what I can dig up." "And I'll handle the second," Yalara said, her crystalline skin catching the room's dim light. "Your defenses are rudimentary at best. If the rogues attack again, you won't survive without a strategy." Calder nodded, her sharp gaze flicking between the two of them. "Good. Work together and keep me updated. Dismissed." As they left the room, Hayes glanced at Yalara. "Looks like we're stuck with each other, Sparkles. Ready to play nice?" "Ready to keep you alive," Yalara replied, "though your survival instincts leave much to be desired." "Hey," Hayes protested, "I've got great instincts. I survived this long, didn't I?" "Barely," she muttered, though her tone held a hint of amusement. Hayes dove into his research with his usual mix of enthusiasm and chaos. The tech lab was a cluttered space filled with wires, screens, and a suspiciously large collection of coffee mugs. Yalara lingered in the doorway, watching as he tinkered with a hollow projector. "Do you even know what you're doing?" she asked after a few minutes. "Not a clue," Hayes admitted cheerfully. "But that's half the fun." Yalara sighed, stepping into the room. "Let me see that." She examined the device with a practiced eye, her movements precise and efficient. Within moments, she had adjusted the settings, and the projector flared to life, displaying a holographic representation of the artifact. "Impressive," Hayes said, leaning closer. "You've got a knack for this." "My people value knowledge as much as strength," Yalara said simply. "Though I doubt you'll understand that, given your methods." "Hey, my methods work," Hayes countered, "and they come with fewer lectures." Yalara shook her head, but there was a faint smile on her lips. As they analyzed the artifact's hologram, Hayes couldn't resist adding a touch of levity to the tense atmosphere. "You know," he said, pointing to a spiky section of the device, "this thing looks like a giant intergalactic waffle maker." "A what?" Yalara asked, genuinely confused. "It's a human thing. Trust me, you'd love it. Best breakfast food in the galaxy." "I'll take your word for it," she said, her tone dry. "Now focus. If this waffle maker is a weapon, we need to figure out how to disarm it." Hayes saluted playfully. "Yes, ma'am." By the end of the day, they had made some progress. The artifact appeared to be an ancient energy amplifier, capable of magnifying power sources to catastrophic levels. If the rogues activated it, they could devastate the colony, and possibly much more. "We need to destroy it," Yalara said firmly. "Agreed," Hayes replied. "But first, we need to figure out how to get close enough without getting vaporized." Yalara nodded, her expression resolute. For all his quirks, Hayes had proven himself resourceful and surprisingly capable. Perhaps, she thought, there was more to him than met the eye. As they left the lab, Hayes glanced at her with a grin. "You know," he said, "if we pull this off, I'll treat you to waffles. Real ones. None of that intergalactic knockoff stuff." Yalara raised an eyebrow. "If we survive, I'll consider it." "Deal," Hayes said, his grin widening. Despite the looming threat, Yalara couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Together, they might just stand a chance. The sky above the colony shimmered in shades of violet and amber, a reflection of the planet's volatile atmosphere. Aurelis 9 wasn't just a backdrop, it was a reminder of how unpredictable the universe could be. A fitting parallel to the plan Sam Hayes was currently concocting. "We're going to steal the artifact," Hayes announced in the colony's makeshift war room, gesturing dramatically to a crudely drawn map on the wall. Yalara stared at him, arms crossed, her crystalline skin catching the dim light like fractured glass. Steal it? You mean infiltrate a heavily fortified rogue base, bypass advanced security systems, and escape with their most prized possession? Exactly, Hayes said, his grin too wide for someone discussing such a reckless idea. You're insane, Ilara said flatly. Insane is a strong word, Hayes replied. I prefer creatively ambitious. Captain Calder pinched the bridge of her nose, a gesture Ilara had come to recognize as her default response to Hayes. Do you at least have a plan, Lieutenant? Of course I have a plan, Hayes said, sounding offended. He tapped the map with a pointer. Step 1. Sneaky Pete gets us past the perimeter defenses. Step 2. We disable the artifact's energy core. Step 3. We haul it out of there like heroes in a holodrama. Ilara's jaw tightened. And step 4? Step 4. Waffles, Hayes said with a wink. Calder groaned. Lieutenant, this is suicide. Not if we stick to the plan, Hayes insisted, and improvise when necessary. Which is all the time, Ilara muttered. The next morning, preparations were in full swing. Ilara meticulously sharpened her plasma blade, her movements precise and methodical. Across the room, Hayes was tinkering with Sneaky Pete, humming what he claimed was a human battle anthem, but sounded suspiciously like a children's song. Are you sure that thing won't malfunction? Ilara asked, nodding toward the drone. Absolutely, Hayes said, though his voice lacked conviction. Sneaky Pete's never let me down before. Except for the time he short-circuited during recon, Ilara pointed out. And the time he mistook a crate of fruit for a weapons cache, Calder added, passing through the room. And don't forget the time he got stuck in a ventilation shaft, said a nearby engineer. All right, Hayes said, raising his hands in mock surrender. Pete's had a rough history, but he's ready for the big leagues now. Right, buddy? The drone beeped weakly, as if uncertain about its own reliability. Ilara shook her head, muttering something in her native tongue. What's that? Hayes asked. An ancient Iovari blessing, Ilara said dryly, roughly translates to, may your foolishness not get us all killed. Catchy, Hayes said with a grin. The infiltration began under the cover of Aurelius IX's swirling dust storms. Sneaky Pete led the way, its tiny form darting through the rogue base's perimeter like an insect on a mission. Behind it, Ilara and Hayes moved with practiced stealth, their footsteps muffled by the sandy terrain. Remember, Ilara whispered, stay close and follow my lead. Got it, Hayes whispered back. Lead away, Sparkles. Ilara shot him a glare, but didn't respond. The first obstacle was the energy shield surrounding the base. Sneaky Pete hovered near the control panel, emitting a series of beeps and clicks as it hacked into the system. Come on, Pete, Hayes murmured. Don't let me down. The shield flickered, then deactivated with a faint hum. See? Hayes said, grinning at Ilara. Pete's got this. Ilara nodded, though her expression remained skeptical. Inside the base, the atmosphere was tense. Rogue soldiers patrolled in tight formations, their weapons glinting under harsh artificial lights. Ilara's heightened senses picked up every sound, every movement, keeping her on edge. Hayes, on the other hand, seemed unbothered. You know, he whispered as they ducked behind a crate, for a group of renegades, these guys have surprisingly good interior design. Look at those light fixtures. Very minimalist. Focus, Hayes, Ilara hissed. I am focused, he replied. I'm just saying if this whole rogue thing doesn't work out for them, they could start a home decor business. Ilara pinched the bridge of her nose, a habit she realized she had picked up from Calder. They reached the artifact's chamber without incident, though Ilara suspected their luck wouldn't hold. The device stood in the center of the room, its crystalline structure pulsing with a soft blue light. There it is, Hayes said, his voice tinged with awe. The intergalactic waffle maker. Ilara ignored him, her focus on the artifact's control panel. We need to disable the energy core before we can move it. Cover me. Hayes saluted. Yes, ma'am. As Ilara worked, her fingers deftly manipulating the controls, Hayes kept watch. His usual joking demeanor had been replaced by a rare seriousness, his sharp eyes scanning the room for any sign of trouble. Of course, trouble arrived anyway. The door slid open, and 2 rogue soldiers stepped inside. Ilara? Hayes said, his voice low. Not now, she replied, her focus unwavering. I think now might be a good time, Hayes insisted. She glanced up just as the soldiers spotted them. Move, Ilara shouted, drawing her plasma blade. Hayes didn't need to be told twice. He dove behind a console, firing off a volley of shots from his energy pistol. Didn't you say this would be easy? Ilara asked, her blade slicing through the first soldier's weapon. I said it'd be fun, Hayes corrected, taking down the second soldier with a well-placed shot. Ilara rolled her eyes, but couldn't suppress a faint smirk. With the soldiers dealt with, they returned to the artifact. Ilara finished disabling the core, and Hayes prepared a hoverlift to transport it. Ready to roll? Hayes asked. Let's go, Ilara said, her voice firm. As they made their escape, alarms blared throughout the base. Rogue reinforcements were closing in, but Hayes and Ilara moved with a coordinated efficiency that spoke of their growing trust in each other. They reached the perimeter, just as the energy shield reactivated. Pete, Hayes shouted, don't fail me now. The drone beeped frantically, and the shield flickered, creating a narrow window for their escape. Go, Ilara commanded. They dashed through the opening, the artifact in tow, just as the shield snapped back into place. Breathless but victorious, Hayes grinned at Ilara. See? I told you we could do it. Ilara shook her head, though there was a hint of admiration in her expression. You're impossible. Impossible is just another word for fun, Hayes said, his grin widening. As they returned to the colony, Ilara couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Perhaps, she thought, this human warrior wasn't so unbelievable after all. The artifact hummed ominously, its crystalline surface glowing faintly as it rested in the center of the colony's tech lab. Ilara stood over it, her arms crossed and her gaze fixed on its intricate structure. Nearby, Sam Hayes was elbow-deep in wires, tools scattered around him like the remnants of a particularly chaotic scavenger hunt. Do you ever clean up after yourself? Ilara asked, her tone sharp. I'm a big believer in the creative power of organized chaos, Hayes replied, not looking up. Besides, tidiness is overrated. Einstein had a messy desk, you know. And yet I doubt Einstein would have left a plasma welder balanced on the edge of a console, Ilara muttered, catching the tool before it tumbled to the floor. Hayes glanced up, grinning. That's why you're here, Sparkles. You keep me grounded. Ilara sighed, though she didn't bother to correct him. She was beginning to understand that Hayes's particular brand of humor was as much a survival mechanism as it was an annoyance. Captain Calder entered the lab, her expression as serious as ever. What's the status? We've stabilized the artifact, Ilara reported. Its energy core is dormant for now, but it's still emitting residual power. We need to find a way to neutralize it permanently. Good news is, Hayes interjected, it hasn't exploded yet. So, you know, progress. Calder gave him a look that could have melted steel. And the bad news? Well, Hayes hesitated, scratching the back of his neck. There's a chance, and by chance I mean a pretty high probability, that the rogues installed a failsafe. If we mess with it too much, it might, explode. Wonderful, Calder said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Do we have a plan for that? I'm working on it, Hayes said, gesturing vaguely to the mess around him. Give me a few hours and another pot of coffee. We don't have a few hours, Calder snapped. Our scouts reported rogue movement less than a kilometer away. They're regrouping and they're coming for their prize. Ilara straightened, her crystalline armor catching the light. Then we fight. Hayes blinked at her. We? As in, you and me? Against a whole rogue army? You wanted to be a hero, Ilara said, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. Yeah, but I was picturing more of a low-risk, high-reward kind of heroism, Hayes muttered. The colony erupted into activity as the news spread. Engineers fortified defenses, soldiers checked their weapons, and a palpable tension filled the air. Despite the looming threat, Hayes found ways to lighten the mood. All right, people, he said, addressing a group of colonists. Let's keep the rogue demolition to a minimum, okay? I'm not fixing another coffee maker. Priorities, folks. A few chuckles rippled through the group, and even Ilara had to admit, albeit silently, that his antics had a way of easing the tension. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the first signs of the rogue attack appeared. Shadows moved in the distance, and the faint hum of engines grew louder. Ilara stood on the front line, her plasma blade glowing faintly in the dim light. "Stay behind me," she told Hayes. "Not a chance," he replied, adjusting his energy rifle. "I've got your back, Sparkles." Ilara glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "Try not to get yourself killed." "Same to you," Hayes said with a grin. The first wave of rogues came fast and hard, their energy weapons lighting up the night. Ilara moved with practiced precision, her blade cutting through the chaos like a shard of light. Hayes followed her lead, his shots precise and calculated. "Nice work," Ilara said as Hayes took down a rogue soldier with a particularly well-aimed shot. "Thanks," Hayes replied. "I've been practicing on holo games. Turns out all those hours weren't wasted." "Of course not," Ilara said dryly. "Your training simulator prepared you for galactic warfare." "Exactly," Hayes said, completely serious. As the battle raged on, the rogues began to close in on the artifact. Calder's voice crackled over the comms. "Hayes, Ilara, fall back to the tech lab. We can't let them take it." "On it!" Hayes shouted, firing a few parting shots before retreating. Inside the lab, the atmosphere was tense. The artifact pulsed faintly, its energy growing more unstable with every passing moment. "We can't hold them off forever," Calder said, entering the room with a grim expression. "Good thing we won't have to," Hayes said, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "What are you planning?" Ilara asked, her tone suspicious. "Something crazy," Hayes admitted, "but crazy is kind of my thing." Hayes's plan, as it turned out, involved rigging the artifact to overload in a controlled explosion, a gamble that could either destroy the rogues or obliterate the colony. "You're insane," Ilara said, watching as Hayes worked furiously. "Creatively ambitious," Hayes corrected. "Recklessly idiotic," Ilara countered. "Semantics," Hayes said with a grin. As the rogues breached the perimeter, the colonists made their last stand. Ilara fought with a ferocity that even she hadn't known she possessed, her blade a blur of motion. Beside her, Hayes proved surprisingly resourceful, using a mix of cunning and sheer audacity to outmaneuver their enemies. Finally, Hayes's voice crackled over the comms. "It's ready. Fall back." Then the colonists retreated as the artifact began to glow brighter, its energy building to a crescendo. The rogues, realizing too late what was happening, scrambled to escape. The explosion lit up the night, a blinding flash of light followed by a shockwave that rattled the colony. When the dust settled, the rogue forces were gone, their base reduced to smoldering rubble. "We did it," Hayes said, collapsing onto the ground with a triumphant grin. "You're lucky we survived," Ilara said, though there was a hint of admiration in her voice. "Luck has nothing to do with it," Hayes replied. "Okay, maybe a little." As the colony began to rebuild, Ilara found herself looking at Hayes in a new light. He was reckless, infuriating, and utterly unconventional, but there was no denying his courage. "You're not what I expected," she said one evening as they surveyed the damage. "Good or bad?" Hayes asked. "Both," Ilara admitted, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Hayes chuckled. "I'll take it." The colony had a stillness to it now. The air, once charged with the tension of battle, was calm, almost serene, as if the planet itself were exhaling. Fires had been extinguished, debris cleared, and the wounded tended to. Yet beneath the surface, the weight of the day's events lingered. Ilara stood on the edge of the colony's perimeter, gazing out into the violet haze of Aurelis IX's twilight. The twin moons hovered low, casting silvery light over the scorched landscape. Beside her, Sam Hayes was balancing a half-eaten ration bar on Sneaky Pete, the little drone beeping indignantly as it tried to stay level. "You're going to overload its servos," Ilara said, not bothering to look. "Pete's tougher than he looks," Hayes replied, though the drone gave a distinctly distressed wobble as the bar slid off. "Besides, he's earned a treat after today's heroics." Ilara turned, raising a skeptical brow. "Heroics?" It flew in a straight line. "Sometimes, that's all it takes to save the day," Hayes said with mock solemnity. "You could learn a thing or two from Pete." "Like how to crash into walls?" Ilara countered, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "See? You are learning," Hayes said, grinning. For a moment, the two stood in companionable silence, watching the moons rise higher. The artifact was gone, its destruction leaving behind a lingering question. Had its loss made the galaxy safer, or had it simply opened the door to more chaos? Ilara found herself pondering this as she walked through the colony, observing the quiet determination of its people. Captain Calder had ordered a debrief for the following morning, but for now, the colonists had earned their rest. Laughter echoed from one of the makeshift dining halls, a sign of resilience that Ilara found oddly comforting. She and Hayes entered the hall to find a group gathered around a table, engaged in a raucous game involving holographic cards and far too much enthusiasm. "Hey, it's the heroes of the hour," someone shouted, raising a cup in salute. Ilara instinctively stiffened at the attention, but Hayes took it in stride, throwing an exaggerated bow. "Please no applause," he said. "Autographs will be available after dessert." The room erupted in laughter, and Ilara found herself reluctantly smiling. Later, as the hall emptied and the colony settled into the quiet hum of night, Ilara and Hayes found themselves sitting outside near a low-burning fire. "Today was unexpected," Ilara said, breaking the silence. "Understatement of the century," Hayes replied, tossing a pebble into the fire and watching it spark. Ilara hesitated, her crystalline fingers tracing patterns in the dirt. "You fight differently than anyone I've ever known." "I'll take that as a compliment," Hayes said, though his tone was softer now. "What do you mean?" "You're kind." She paused, searching for the right words. "Your kind doesn't have the strength, the endurance, the sheer power of mine. And yet you fight with such heart. It's as if giving up isn't an option for you." "It's not," Hayes said simply. "Giving up's boring." Ilara glanced at him, and for once there was no trace of humor in his expression. "It's more than that," she said. "You face impossible odds with a determination I've never understood. I always thought humans were fragile, but now, I think I was wrong." "You weren't wrong," Hayes said. "We are fragile, breakable even. But that's what makes us dangerous." "How so?" "Because we know we don't have the luxury of failing too many times. So when we fight like it's the last chance we'll ever get." The fire crackled between them, and for a moment, the weight of his words hung in the air. The following morning, the debrief took place in the colony's central hall. Captain Calder stood at the front, addressing the gathered crowd with her usual no-nonsense demeanor. "We've driven the rogues back and destroyed their artifact," she said. "For now, Aurelis IX is safe, but we must remain vigilant. This was just one battle in a much larger war." As the meeting concluded, Calder approached Ilara and Hayes. "You two make an interesting team," she said, her tone grudgingly approving. Thanks, Cap, Hayes said, flashing his trademark grin. Don't push it, Lieutenant, Calder replied, though her expression softened. As the day wore on, preparations began for Ilara's departure. Her diplomatic mission had taken a detour she hadn't expected, but it had also given her something she hadn't realized she was searching for: perspective. Hayes was there as she packed her few belongings, leaning against the doorframe with his usual casual demeanor. So, what's next for you? He asked. Return to my people, Ilara said. Report what I've learned. And what have you learned? That humans are as stubborn as they are resourceful, she said, a faint smirk on her lips. Hayes laughed. I'll take that as a compliment. You should, Ilara said. It's the highest praise I've given in years. As Ilara prepared to board her shuttle, the colony gathered to see her off. Calder offered a respectful nod, and Hayes, ever the showman, saluted dramatically. Don't be a stranger, he said. You've got my comm frequency. Use it the next time you need saving. Or the next time you need me to save you, Ilara countered. Touché, Hayes said, grinning. As the shuttle lifted off, Ilara found herself watching the colony shrink below her. For the first time, she felt a pang of something she hadn't expected: attachment. Humans, she thought, were more than the fairy tales her people had dismissed. They were chaotic, fragile, and infuriating. But they were also extraordinary. And perhaps, in some small way, they had changed her as much as she had changed her view of them.